Hello everyone, Inquisitor Vaughn here, and in today's video I would like to continue with our Cursed Founding Chapters series by going into the Flame Falcons. The Flame Falcons are one of the more obscure chapters of Space Marines said to have been created as part of the Cursed Founding. Unlike the majority of the chapters listed as part of the Founding, the color scheme and heraldry of the chapter are unknown. This is likely due to the chapter being considered excommunicatus traitoris within 100 years of their creation. As I've said in each video concerning the chapters of the 21st Founding, the information available on how or why the chapters are included is slightly different and unique from one another. With the Flame Falcons, it's emphasized that some of the chapters had remarkable bad luck, and I think this hints at the fate endured by this chapter. Things had started out really well for the Flame Falcons. Their initial recruits would be taken from the planet that would eventually become their homeworld, the planet Lethe. The planet Lethe already had a storied history in the Imperium of Man that went as far back as during the Great Crusade. The misty, river-filled world was located in the Segmentum Obscurus and was considered a frontier world when it was discovered. Lethe was a part of the Manichaean Commonwealth, a network of human-inhabited worlds in the coordinate deeps that survived and thrived during the Age of Strife, making the planet and the entire Commonwealth of strategic value to the growing Imperium of Man at the time. Of the many Solar Auxilia cohorts that would be raised, the 905 Ash Scorpions would have its members recruited from the tribal and fierce people of Lethe. The Ash Scorpions were renowned for their aggression as well as their dedication in battle, which earned the cohort many battle honors. Though the world has been a part of the Imperium for nearly 1,000 years, it still remained a mostly unindustrialized frontier world well into the 36th millennium, during which its population was chosen as the recruits for the Flame Falcons chapter. After initial combat trials, the chapter was deployed to the southern rim of the galaxy to fight against Xenos there, and for nearly 100 years, the Flame Falcons held the line against alien corsairs that threatened to invade deeper into the Imperium. However, things would change rather suddenly when during a battle on Raffenberg's world, the first company of the chapter spontaneously immolated, setting on fire out of nowhere. The commander of the Marines called for an Inquisitor that had accompanied the Astra Militarum forces during this conflict, thinking that sorcery was the blame, but upon seeing that the flames had no effect on the Marines but still burned the enemy, the commander declared it a miracle, a blessing from the Emperor. The Inquisitor saw this and had other interpretations of what was happening, but they said nothing, biding their time as the rest of the Marines began to immolate and savagely cut down their enemies. The Flame Falcons would return to Lethe after the battle in a celebratory mood at how they were so blessed by the Emperor, but it was the Grey Knights that descended onto the homeworld, slaughtering the majority of the chapter and committing exterminatus on the planet, wiping it of all life. Very few Flame Falcons survived this annihilation at the hands of the Grey Knights, and those who did are in hiding from the wrath of the Inquisition. The Grey Knights are specifically demon hunters and combatants of denizens of the warp. They were called upon because the Inquisitor that witnessed the Flaming Marines thought it was either sorcery or possession of the Flame Falcons that he was witnessing, so clearly they thought it was warp-based. Whether or not they were actually warp-based abilities is not confirmed, but the suspicion was there and it was enough to act in such a drastic way. The flames were physical, meaning that they burnt what they touched, but the fire did not have an effect on the Marines of the chapter, and this ability didn't surface until nearly 100 years after the chapter was founded. The fact that the flames didn't manifest immediately after the chapter's creation hints at the possibility that the Flame Falcons were legitimately a creation of the Homo sapiens Novus project. Plus, if we just look at the chapter's name, the Flame Falcons, it's kind of a foreboding if there ever was one. What I was curious about was how immolation was possible and what gene seed organ could have possibly been responsible or manipulated to give the chapter this ability. Though the gene seed organs all work together to produce a functioning Space Marine, I would think that the specific organ that could have been modified would be the mucranoid gland. The mucranoid gland is one of the 19 gene seed organs implanted into a space marine in order to make them a space marine. The gland is implanted and attached to the central nervous system of the marine, and it responds to external stimuli, and in certain conditions, it will influence the skin to secrete a waxy protein substance through the pores. This reaction is activated by the marine themselves through a chemical treatment. It would appear that there might have been modifications done to the mucranoid gland that would make the skin of the marine combust and react to external stimuli. But what external stimuli? If we look at the details about the battle at Raffenberg's world, it said that it was when the battle was at its thickest that the spontaneous combustion happened, and that it started amongst the first company, which are usually the veteran marines of a chapter, before it spread to everybody else. While I'm sure that the Flame Falcons have found themselves fighting intensely in previous conflicts, perhaps it could have been the intensity of the battle combined with the time that made this effect happen. Perhaps it was only after a certain number of years that the gene seed would develop this trait, and so it just so happened that the effect actualized on Raffenberg's world because the number of years was reached that day. However, as said earlier, the homeworld of the Flame Falcons was destroyed and the chapter was near decimated by the Grey Knights, with only a few survivors escaping their fate. There are known to still be individual Flame Falcons still surviving, many of them serving as members of the Death Watch or directly under Inquisitors as part of their retinue. An example of this is the Flame Falcon Garak, who still serves under Inquisitor Lord Otto Dagobert as a black shield of the Death Watch. It's actually from Garak that we find out that the Flame Falcons can actually control their immolation, turning their fiery ability on and off at will to use as a weapon of self-defense. Being that the Flame Falcons are a decimated chapter, we do not know what their battle tactics were, but we do know that they served alongside the Death Strike, Genesis, and Iron Hands chapter in committing a series of exterminatus bombardments on the unconsumed worlds of the Ulic sector to rob Hive Fleet Leviathan of biomass, thus successfully stopping the progression of the Tyranid Hive Fleet. The only thing that we can say about the chapter is that they were aggressive and committed fighters, having come from Lethe's tribal population, which had maintained such a reputation since the Great Crusade. In regards to what chapter the Flame Falcons were successors of, it's officially unknown and unofficially hard to determine. There are no references to draw off of or official artwork of them. We don't know their chapter master, their organization, or any chapter specific names that can be used to determine gene seed lineage. For now, we simply don't know, and it's unlikely that we will ever find out, being that the chapter is basically non-existent. However, you all know that I don't like that answer. So, I think there's a reason why out of all the Chamber militants, it was the Grey Knights that were called. It's because they are demon hunters, and though there might not have been any demonic activity going on in an obvious way, there actually could have been in a subtle way. The Flame Falcon's story of being in a super intense fight and suddenly gaining both a fire-based ability and overall an ability that they didn't know they had previously reminds me of the Primarch Magnus's time on Prospero before he was physically discovered by the Emperor. The Primarch Magnus, arguably the most psychically powerful of the Primarchs, landed on the planet Prospero when the Primarch gestation pods were scattered throughout the galaxy. Ironically, Prospero would be a world of psychers and sorcerers who had hidden from destruction during the Age of Strife. The Prosperans at this time lived underground beneath Tizca, the City of Light, and they did so because the world was plagued by wasp-like warp creatures called Psychonuan that fed on psychers, using their bodies to spawn more warp creatures. Still though, the people of Prospero practiced their sorcery and honed their skill in their underground abodes, eventually teaching Magnus the skills as well. The young Magnus soon learned all he could and became impatient from not having a real challenge, so he would travel to the surface of Prospero and journey out into the deserts to test himself and his ability. Needless to say, he was attacked by the Psychnuan, the warp creatures, but the rest of the Prosperans had caught up with him by this point and began fighting back using their abilities in the best way they knew how. Suddenly, out of nowhere, Magnus gained the ability to project fire from his hands, fires that disintegrated the Psyche-Nuin. When the Prosperans followed his gesture, they too gained the ability and were quickly able to defeat the warp creatures. While it was happening, one of the strongest sorcerers on Prospero, Amon, looked around him and knew that something wasn't right, and he began yelling for them to stop, but no one listened to him. After this conflict, Magnus created different orders of sorcery based on the new abilities that he and the Prosperans had suddenly developed. Unfortunately, without knowing it, Magnus had damned his legion in doing so. During the conflict, as the Prosperans were getting overwhelmed, a voice asked Magnus if he needed more power, and he said yes before receiving it. The voice that offered him more power belonged to the chaos god Tzeentch, and Magnus unknowingly entered into a deal with one of the 4 chaos gods. So, it makes sense that the Grey Knights were called in response to the Flame Falcons' spontaneous combusting, and why they responded so quickly and violently. They thought that it could have been the powers of Tzeentch at work again. Just another bit of lore surrounding the possible Magnus connection. There were 5 cults of sorcery made by Magnus after the Psyche-Nuin attack, and one of them was the Pyre cult, characterized by their ability to project, control, and direct fire, a fire that did not burn its practitioners. The symbol of this cult was that of a scarlet phoenix, which looks like a bird made of fire. Phoenixes were actually called firebirds, and firebird sounds like the origin word of flame falcon. Thus, I conclude, if the Flame Falcons could be successors of any bloodline, I would say that they are successors of the Thousand Sons Legion. In regards to whether or not the Flame Falcons are actually a cursed founding chapter or a chapter created as part of the Homo sapiens Novus project, I think that they are not an actual cursed founding chapter. The effects of their curse didn't kick in until much later, which means the gene seed was thought to be stable before it was mass produced. This would usually mark it as one of the cursed founding chapters to me. Though the Marines essentially set on fire, their bodies were not burnt or affected by the flames, and though I attribute the possibility of immolation to the mucranoid gland, it is completely possible that the tribal recruits of Lethe were somehow modified before being implanted with the gene seed of the chapter. There is an uncanny similarity in theme between the Solar Auxilia force made from Lethe, which would be called the Ash Scorpions, and the chapter made from the same population, which would be called the Flame Falcons. However, the chapter does not meet the second requirement of having to be bigger than standard Marines, which is a point that I consider the goal of the Homo sapiens Novus project to be. And there is a possibility that the Flame Falcons are Thousand Sons' successor, and the ability to immolate is warp based. Therefore, I do not think the Flame Falcons are a cursed founding chapter and are not a part of the Homo sapiens Novus project. They were likely a dark founding chapter, and they were hunted down not for being cursed, because again, no one knew about the cursed founding back then, but for fear of corruption. And that was my deep dive into the Flame Falcons. What do you guys think about the Flame Falcons? Are any of you inspired to make one of your Deathwatch Marines a Flame Falcon? I feel like we should have more artwork of the surviving Flame Falcons, just to see like a Space Marine standing in flame while in armor. It would be so cool, right? Let me know in the comments below. Please like the video if you liked the video, and share with a friend as it helps the channel grow. Without anything else to say, Inquisitor Vaughn out. Remember, the Emperor protects and the future is successor.